Hi everyone, this is audap. Let's continue our game of Hermitage, Strange Case Files on Nintendo Switch. You know, it's funny, I didn't think I'd be into this game, especially after the first couple hours where, like, I felt the translation wasn't very good and that there were a lot of gaps in the conversation. And I still feel that way, but now that we played it for a while, I've kind of gotten used to the writing style, or the translation style, and it just being one of those games where not everything is explained. It's like you're delving into a world where people have already existed for a while, and so their conversations and thoughts don't lend themselves to a lot of careful explanation. I mean, it's an interesting way to tell a story, just to drop you in without like a lot of backstory. I think, though, for a game this complex, with so many things going on, maybe it wasn't really the greatest decision, but it just may be the Chinese to English translation that's not really working out very well. Yeah, not really sure. This whole thing is just a mess from top to bottom. What have we gotten ourselves into this time? What does stand like rocks even mean? Frustrated, I crumple my notes into a paper ball and throw them into the basket next to me. The fact that Hermitage is utterly quiet at night is nice, but in this case it isn't helping. Justin hurried away right after receiving a call from the police, intent on going to the scene of the murder personally. He looked pained when he left, obviously overcome with disbelief and extreme remorse. The person he was in contact with only recently is now dead. The whole situation must be weighing heavily on him. Although he's never explicitly spoken about it, I think Justin feels a sense of protectiveness, and no matter who the suspect is, justice should never be carried out outside the law like that. Even after such a short time of knowing him, his work ethic and sense of responsibility have become apparent to us all. For a man like him, who takes pride in his profession, there's nothing worse than experiencing failure. However, neither Neko nor me are in a position to comfort him. I just hope he finds some solace in his work. Pseudo-heartfelt, empty speeches aren't my style, and Neko is the same in that regard. People should stick to what they're good at. It's better to offer help where it's actually useful. It's just a more genuine approach. There has to be a way to figure all this out. After having talked to that strange visitor, the hidden contents of the halberd aren't particularly hard to crack. Once you know what mystery he's talking about, the author's reference actually seems a little ridiculous. The text often alludes to the concept of time. The book itself is a war biography with its own narrative timeline. The way in which the events are connected via a timeline is quite absurd, but once you've cracked the code, it becomes much clearer. The key lies in the coding table, that is, the correspondence between the documentary records and real time. When observing the sky, the movements of celestial bodies should be pretty regular, and the records should share certain characteristics. One evening of cross-referencing, and it should be possible to find matching combinations with obvious patterns. The problem is the remaining text. Stands like rocks, chant names, let the beast be forever on our side. The protagonist often prays for victory with his comrades, but war records aren't usually as detailed in this regard. Most literature on the subject wouldn't waste time on stuff like that. There has to be some hidden meaning to those passages, but what could it be? Just when I start rubbing my face like a madman lost in thought, my phone starts vibrating. One look at the caller ID and I'm not exactly surprised. I guess you're in trouble again. Neko told you? Yep, sure did. Don't get all worked up about it. An elderly woman we stumbled upon in our investigation appears to have been killed. Justin is on his way to the scene to confirm it. Do you happen to have any clues? Inside scoops, maybe? How would I? It's not like I'm running from crime scene to crime scene. But the building itself is very peculiar. Yeah, you've told me about that. Doesn't seem like things have calmed down, though. Shortly after the incident, there were plans to move ahead with the construction of the residential area again. However, the person in charge disappeared shortly afterwards. Fired? Who knows? That land must be really valuable because it's happened multiple times already. And it's never attracted attention? I mean, they're not super important officials. I'm sure reports are made, but they just swept under the rug. So they decided to keep the records a secret. Quite a humiliating defeat. I've also heard from some fans on the inside that someone was definitely orchestrating this to keep the other building projects from progressing. You think the locals are involved? Indeed. They are the ones who would benefit from it, having built their own cheap housing units in that forsaken neighborhood. And it's plain to see how far they're willing to go. There's bound to be a lot of money involved in this. With the prevailing atmosphere, not to mention the harsh resistance, they're not exactly welcome. Offering help doesn't seem sincere when ridiculously large sums of money are involved. Maybe the locals decided to build cheap housing themselves because they felt abandoned. Might as well go ask them yourself. All in all, not much has turned up. The only clue given by the witnesses was that the men who attacked the officers were dressed strangely. Care to elaborate? They used thin twine and a piece of yellow cloth with a strange pattern to cover their faces, similar to wearing a mask. Yellow cloth? Are you sure? I mean, I can't be sure. I'm just receiving witness statements here, but it really is intriguing. Seems really excessive if it was just to hide their identity. It's already very dark around there because the lights barely work. You're right. If anything, those patterns on the mask would attract even more attention. Anyway, that's about all I can tell you so far. Be sure to keep me in the loop if you find anything too. Interesting. That group has kept people away from the buildings in the past. With Scarlet's information, the situation the deliverer referred to in the morning seems clearer now. If they don't want anyone else getting close to that place, that just shows how important it must be to them. Seems that only 2 families have ever lived in that place from beginning to end, and now there's only 1 left. Doesn't come as a complete surprise. The family portrait has odd and strange symbols that indicate that something's out of the ordinary after all. What is that group's purpose? Let's see. Purpose of the Visionary Society. The unannounced visitor at the bookstore proves that somebody organized these recent murders. Why would they do that? See, dangerous abandoned buildings. The Kangyang community has originally had a carefully thought out construction plan, but shortly after the first building was constructed, it had to terminate all subsequent construction for some reason. The deliverer's companions also seem to have had an interest in the place, but they failed to settle there, hastily retreating after an odd accident. The officials tried to restart construction of the residential area, but were repeatedly stopped by a group of people with masks, and they eventually stopped trying. By disguising themselves as sanitation workers who are picking up garbage, the mysterious organization may be transporting bodies out of the abandoned buildings in the Kangyang district. Drag marks in the hallway. Clearly only a few people live in the residential building, but the hallways are covered in fresh drag marks. They continue all the way along the hallway, judging by their size. The object that caused them must have been rather large. However, in this book, an ancient general conquered the surrounding countries. After every victory, he would lead his entire army to a grand sacrifice, holding up a seal towards the sky. He chanted, "We shall forever stand like rocks and be remembered. They will chant our names in glorious songs and celebrate us in joyous dance. Let the beast be forever on our side. Follow the ceremonial rites and chant along, with your voice twice as loud as your harvest twice as fruitful. Let us bask in joy and happiness, for good fortune shall favor us, and we shall be protected against whatever sorrow and misery lies out there." A careful analysis of the constellations revealed that the general and his troops never achieved victory outside of the winter months. So we know the halbert's involved. scratches on the faces of the portrait. They're trying to get rid of it, get rid of the evidence. That makes sense. And then an organization called the Visionary Society unexpectedly visited Hermitage to find some lost books, so yeah. Things aren't clear yet. There may be other pieces of information to shed light on the purpose of the ceremony. Oh, I don't think I have all the evidence. Okay, hold on. Let's go back. I think I'm missing something. Okay. Let's see, anything in here? We're missing something, some clue. This seems the same. Prescriptions. Mysterious symbols. There we go, okay. The author classifies this pattern as parent, altar, guide, and open the way, and he speculates that it may have been used to mark the role of the parents as sacrifices in the ritual. Unfortunately, the author doesn't know how much of the specific cultural group it is associated with, and isn't aware of the exact process and purpose of the ceremony. See, so many of these creatures are mentioned that I have to write them down one by one to give them some kind of order. It's the halberd again. Again, that seems the same. See, after carefully comparing the time of the sacrifice and the constellations, certain patterns emerge. 42 suggestions for practicing medicine abroad. Okay, I think this is the same. Self-analysis, self-evaluation, self-cognition. 7 C's. Solve Cthulhu Miss. I don't think we're dealing with Cthulhu parts at this part of the game. Okay, so I did get an additional clue on that. What are my thoughts? The unhealthy smoke rises up and a small cloud forms near the ceiling. It's hard to keep a clear head and think straight when human lives are at stake. Justin shares that sentiment, even more so than me, but there's no turning back now. Justin shouldn't think so much about it. Even Neko, who should be a lot more sensitive, seems to have gotten used to the grim circumstances. After all, she, or rather we, went through it in the past. That's understandable. The symbol Neko found on that photo seems familiar. I have seen it somewhere before. Maybe I should have another look at my books. Okay, so that's the... That was the clue that was missing. Okay, so this should get me past being stuck there. So what do we say? We said we wanted the halberd of why they're there. And we want... Let's see, Justin found a family portrait in Hildy's home, which shows Hildy and her family from when she was young. Neko revisited the residential building that day after the detectives visited Hildy's home and found the portrait in the trash can downstairs. Both of the parents' photos had mysterious scratches on them. The book Mysterious Symbols made me realize that these marks represent the parents' identities, as well as standing for the sacrifice and passage. So I want that, and then we need to get out of here. Purpose of the Visionary Society, rituals by the Visionary Society. So, is he really a member of it as well? I get the broad gist of the ceremony, but I'm not satisfied at all. If my suspicions are correct, the leadership between the family and the thugs run much deeper than originally assumed. After what Justin said, we should leave the family alone for now. Is this part of the investigation really finished? If that's the case, why would she get involved now? There's only one way to find out. I have to say, relying on people much younger than myself for help is starting to get really embarrassing. It doesn't exactly help me feel any more youthful or useful. What a man's gotta do, what a man's gotta do. I pick up my phone, ready to contact Neko. Hey, are you still up? You don't have to ask me that before 3 in the morning. You know me. Something's come up and I need you to do me a favor. Do I need to put on my shoes for that? Woody as always. Yes, you do. Scarlet will probably flail my skin over this afterwards, but I can't worry about that now, although she does scare me. I put down my books and make my way up the stairs. Can you understand me? Come on, count how many fingers I'm showing you. You know what fingers are, don't you? Very good. Seems like you're a quick learner. This is your leg, this is your hand, and this is your head. Remember, those spots are fragile. They're vulnerable. You don't want anyone touching those. You don't want to get hurt, do you? Not bad. Now let's try walking. At last, Scarlet is back at the store. Talk of the murders has been spreading, so Scarlet had to put down her other work and devote more of her energy to this case. It simply can't be ignored any longer. If we let this threat develop any further, sooner or later the city's police force will become more agitated. A price we can't afford to pay. This has to be dealt with, even if we're reluctant to do so. We have as good a justification as any. So, Justin's not back? No, seems like he's been working at the scene all night, but I didn't ask too many questions about it. So they really found it's true? Yeah, Justin texted me and confirmed it. he should be on the scene to aid with the investigation. Since they entrusted the case to him, the police seem okay with him working autonomously. Given his fairly young age, that level of trust must be well-founded. It can't be solely due to the fact that they all get along with each other. We should give him some time to focus and deal with this. He doesn't need anything else piling up on top of it. Says the guy kicking up his feet in the comfy confines of his home. Hey, I can't always be the one to blame. I'm actually risking a lot. Letting minors like you stay up all night and encouraging your shenanigans. Also, quit acting like I'm just idling around doing nothing. Those bags under my eyes could save me in a car crash by now. I can never tell if it's just you staying up all night or some midlife crisis attempted goth makeup. Anyway, it took me all night, again, but I've gained some insight on the stories in the Halberd. Is that the book they're looking for? Yeah, after aligning the seasons using the descriptions of the grass and trees, it becomes a lot more vivid and interesting. Incidentally, it made me realize that this is definitely not a book of domestic origin. Oh, why's that? The book mentions one ever-victorious general, forever caught in a cycle of battle after battle, who always appears in autumn, like clockwork. The places in his country have very odd names. Chinese names always contain some kind of ideographic information. Proximity to water, mountainous valleys, fertile land. But in this case, it's different. So I tried looking at it from a different angle, analyzing the words only in terms of their various dialects and official pronunciations, only to arrive at the conclusion that it's probably derived from the English language. So, what's the problem? It's way too advanced. Using a foreign language version of your actual name, even if our ancestors were way smarter than that we give them credit for, this is just too much. Only if this method were to be acknowledged and applied around the globe could a code like this be used. The person who wrote this couldn't possibly have that kind of knowledge. What else is in that general story? His name itself is quite meaningful. Aldebaran, part of the Winter Hexagon, one of the 4 royal stars of ancient Persia. The locations surrounding this general are named after the Taurus constellation, and he is the only person to have a name like that. The prominence of that specific star is evident by comparison. In other words, the opposing countries in the book were actually keeping track of the celestial bodies? Exactly. Although there are probably many unknown factors involved, one thing is made very clear. Only the victors deserve to go to heaven. There's a huge back and forth for decades, the same pattern of defeating and being defeated, repeating itself over and over again. So, even with all those spooky rituals mentioned in the book, in the end it's really just a fancy timetable? I don't think we can call those rituals meaningless just yet. According to what our strange visitor said, the book describes a way to discover the right time, so there must be some importance to them. You keep mentioning the general. He must play a key role in all of this. After everything you said, we should be able to derive some patterns from the celestial bodies, right? Right. With that approach, how would we find out the location of those guys who came looking for us? Well, parts of the Winter Triangle can only be seen in winter. At least that's what the internet tells me. That could be a clue. By filtering the times and places that the general in the book found himself in, we can construct a consistent timeline. I have to say, nothing's more conspicuous than that sacrifice in which he served as both general and priest. That part sticks out like a sore thumb. It just doesn't make sense. If a single person had that many military and religious responsibilities, it's unlikely that such a big war would have kept going on like that. It would simply be unproductive. So you're saying... so you're going to use these rituals as definite criteria? The timing aspect is important, but so is the ritual in the sacrificial ceremony. Too much of the text is dedicated to it for it to be irrelevant. The author deliberately describes it in a long-winded way, probably in an attempt to pass along knowledge for those who know the true meaning behind the book. And now it's our turn to crack this code. Headaches, here we come. There has to be a way. Invite the beast from the other realm. Keep chanting in a clear and confident fashion. That sentence foreshadows almost the entire ceremony. It literally describes the main points of the ritual perfectly. Foreign legends and myths often feature the blowing of a horn or a similar instrument to summon mythical monsters, and this ceremony is probably no exception. Set the scene, summon the beast, and await its response. That much seems clear. As for the beast mentioned in the book, it seems to have left its mark, otherwise we wouldn't be caught up in this whole affair in the first place. Alright, so what exactly could it be? Hidden danger. During our investigation, we discovered that there may indeed be dangers other than the few villains in the Kongyang neighborhood. What exactly could they be? Okay, so we got a dangerous abandoned building. The Kangyang community originally had a carefully thought out construction plan, but shortly after the first building was constructed, it had to terminate all subsequent construction work for some reason. The Deliverer's companions also seemed to have an interest in the place, but they failed to settle there and hastily retreated after an odd accident. Officials tried to restart the construction in the residential area, but were repeatedly stopped by a group of people with masks, and they eventually stopped trying. Conclusion: mass murder. By disguising themselves as sanitation workers who are picking up garbage, the mysterious organization may be transporting bodies out of the abandoned buildings in the Kangyang district. Okay, so we can say shrines, gods and messengers 1. In this wonderful book, the author mentions a divine messenger. Oh, I think I've read these before. Yeah. There's whistling in the night. A neighbor who lives near Hildy's residence mentioned that from time to time a strange whistling sound can be heard in the area. And the whistling is the creature, the flying creature. Let's see, the organization known as the Visionary Society is eager to communicate with this master and escape the world to another dimension free of pain and trouble. Hildy's family seems to have served as parents, sacrifices, and passages. In this context, likely that they are related to all of this is quite high. And then it should be the legend. Hidden danger, gargoyle. I'd like to add that our initial suspicions have been basically confirmed. Although people are involved in these murders, possibly many of them, most fatal injuries were inflicted by human hands. The book Shrines, Gods, and Messengers describes several myths about servants who worship and aid their deities, many of which are of non-human origin. I grabbed the thick book from the shelf and opened it up for the others to see. The gargoyle, for example, who serves a god in the vastness of the distant stars, it has wide wings, a horse's body, and insectuous traits. The servant is fed and nourished with blood and fresh meat until it completes its mission. No, that is the other building. Not many people seem to be living there. Nobody talks about it, and the place gives me the creeps. I've heard that the wind sounds weird over there, like chimes or something. It scares the kids half to death. Sometimes you can hear a violin playing. True horror flick stuff right there. It's really creepy. It gives me the shivers. Imagine an out-of-tune string instrument, you know what I mean? Or, I don't know, a horse that sounds strangely distorted when it neighs. It's just this weird hissing sound that paralyzes you. That photograph Nico found is a sign that the family was involved in a ritual in which they must have acted as guardians. And now the rooftop is locked. Corpses are being carried from the building, blood dry. If we can find out what kind of creature the book is talking about, we can analyze the purpose of the ritual. At least we know what the blood is used for now. I flipped through the pages to show the others after having identified the target. I spent a lot of time combing through the book for further details. According to this, the gargoyle can travel freely between the human world and the infinite stars and skies. It plays an important role as a messenger between those planes of existence. It has birds' wings, but I doubt they're much of use in a cosmic environment. As soon as it leaves the atmosphere, it makes use of other body parts to move around. According to this book, the corresponding organ is located in the lower abdominal cavity, which is difficult to identify by appearance alone. It seems to directly affect the space around it, like a fish slicing through water and propelling its body forward. Honestly, I'm not sure how that principle is supposed to work. I suspect that it's not something the human mind could grasp. Being a servant of a greater entity, the gargoyle only descends from the heavens when summoned. If such a being has really been here for decades, there must be a specific reason for that. Either it hasn't fulfilled its mission yet, or its means of travel have been blocked, leaving it stranded down here. Whatever the reason being trapped here on Earth for so long, I'm afraid this is a little more serious than just a bird with broken wings. Only after having said those things out loud do we realize the severity of it all, and for a moment everyone is at a loss for words. Saying and hearing all this feels liberating in a way, but none of it bodes well for what lies ahead. After a painstakingly long silence, Nico sighs and picks up the conversation again. I guess now's as good a time as any. That sounds ominous. Should I be worried? A teensy bit, maybe? Alright, one at a time, please.
When I did my snooping around the company, an anonymous friend sent me a list of their employees.
What?
Hear me out. The list was processed electronically, but the information on it was clearly filled out manually. The form is full of unnecessary notes, much like something you'd have seen in the old days when you filled out a form by hand. Also, the date is 1989.
So it's a list of employees from almost 30 years ago?
Well, I found the name of Mrs. Huang's family on it.
Were both parents employees there?
Her husband was a technician, but it looks like he was marked for observation.
For being an intellectual?
The intellectuals who came back from overseas, was there really anyone who left to study abroad at that time? I've heard people say that in those days it was pretty much impossible to leave the country.
That's true to a certain extent, but you should know best that people always find ways around rules they don't agree with.
Even before the founding of this republic, there were people who went to the US by means of labor trafficking and settled down to have children and grandchildren there. People with a strong enough drive have never allowed themselves to be limited by the times they live in. Thanks for the lesson. Anyway, the whole family was removed from the list and apparently wasn't able to work at the company anymore. Looks like they hadn't worked there that long compared to most people in the first place.
How peculiar.
Can't find the other old lady's name at all. It's strange. Probably worked in another department, or not at the company at all.
I don't mean to play a negative Nancy here, but can we really trust your anonymous friend?
We don't have much of a choice, do we? However, I never mentioned to anyone that I was investigating this matter, and this guy emailed me very spontaneously of his own accord. He's either even more skilled than me, or just knows my habits a little too well. I find both hard to believe, but what counts now is that the emails exist.
So you think we should listen to somebody who has the means to feed us such information anonymously?
I would have worded it differently, but yeah.
Got it. Anything else?
We found records of similar cases right here in the country, not even too far away.
If these past few days have taught me anything, it's that life is truly full of surprises.
Let's face it, the material you provided is often just gibberish, and actual crime research is more valuable than ancient, potentially inaccurate biographical information. So, Scarlett took me to the library archives. By the way, I had to use a fake ID for that. I just don't have those lying around, so I think some financial compensation is in order. To be honest, we had nothing to show for it, but as luck would have it, we stumbled upon a nerd who had overheard our conversation and happened to know quite a bit about the subject. No way she talked to him all innocent and cute. The way she talked to him all innocent and cute? I'm gonna have nightmares now because I had to witness the whole thing.
Mesmerizing library nerds through seduction to gather information. Yep, sounds like Scarlett. To him, you must have seemed like an angel or something.
Shut up. Anyway, I tried to describe to him what was mentioned in the book, and he ended up hitting a home run. There was an uproar in the late 80s about after a lot of farm animals disappeared throughout the country, but because they were a lot of religious sensitivities involved, hardly any records were filed.
I can imagine. Traditions run deep, and if word gets out about things like that, the public outcry tends to be immense.
Anyway, when things like that happen in communities, police question those involved, and in this case they stumbled upon something they'd never expected, and that's straight from the nerd's mouth.
A little devil like you should be happy to have been born in a time with fewer harsh laws. You're basically a walking, talking crime.
Very funny. What it boils down to is that in these rural areas, some people were so obsessed with their faith that sacrificing a human life seemed plausible to them. Law enforcement saw that a little differently.
So someone actually performed a sacrifice?
Yeah, but the way they found out wasn't because of the sacrifice itself. A quarry owner alerted the police because someone had been stealing rocks and stones, sometimes leaving strange marks behind. They observed the scene and quietly followed the suspect.
Scarlett suddenly stops talking.
At a secret hiding place, the police finally discovered the victim. The body was completely torn apart, twisted into an almost square shape, bones protruding. According to the records, the culprits were a group of people who called themselves the Visionary Society. They wore strange costumes as they sang and danced around the victim, and the fumes of smoke in the room were so dense it was almost impossible to see through them. A very chaotic scene. Chanting, dancing, calling an entity's name, incense being burned. Sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? There are copies of the marks in the case file, although it's not exactly the same symbol as the family photo. It simply looks similar.
So those might be the same people that summoned the gargoyle.
Meaning they had bigger plans than to just summon it.
They must have a reason, otherwise the risk would be far too high. It just caused them problems.
After all, it is classified as a servant, not as some greater god. That difference alone implies that the creature isn't actually omnipotent. But what's still unclear is that whole stand like rocks line. Where does that fit in? In a literal sense, there's a contradiction here. Why would they steal rocks for a ritual when they were already using people to stand like rocks, contouring and twisting their bodies and sacrificing them? I have to say, they might have just been in crisis management mode. I'm no kidnapping expert, but I'd say that stealing a rock is easier than stealing a human being. Honestly, it probably wouldn't have made much of a difference as far as punishment for a crime that went in that era. We might never be able to figure out what exactly went on back there. Organizing a ceremony like that isn't as easy as old ancient books make it out to be, especially not in modern times, right? You have to assume that you're under permanent scrutiny and could be reported to the police at any moment by anyone. It could be the guy fixing your toilet who reports you, you know? Yep, gotta watch out for those devilish evil sanitation workers. We knew as much already. Is there anything else about this visionary society? I couldn't dig up that much. According to the confession statement, its members are from highly mixed social standings, working-class farmers and intellectual academics alike. They're doing their thing in secrecy in the mountains, hibernating in the countryside for long periods of time. And you can't rule out the possibility that they've switched to another name by now. Going by multiple names and having false identities would make them clearly impossible to locate. What we know for sure is that the raid shook them up enough for the police to catch a few old men and foreigners who were well-respected members within the cult. These people won't talk, but the leaders must be under constant pressure. Losing valuable members with inside knowledge about the cult must keep them awake at night. It would have saved us so much trouble if they had just gotten all of them in one fell swoop. I would have preferred it that way too, except that someone with a gun in their pocket made sure to remind me that things aren't quite as rosy. If we are indeed talking about the same group of people, then there is a faction of the cult members scouring the city for lost books, and if their drastic measures are any indication, they don't have much time left. I don't mean to sound harsh, but why didn't they just off you right then and there? Maybe they're still missing something that they can't find on their own. Murdering me would have only increased their risk of exposure, especially today with surveillance at nearly every corner. So what else are they up to? It could be that this part of the ritual didn't have anything to do with me. After all, the man only wanted to know about stargazing techniques, and its timing in this book didn't say a word about any rituals. Either he's trying to hide it, or he doesn't need to learn about any rituals from me. There's a 50-50 chance. 4 lives have already been lost. What do we do? Find out what they're up to, then get help or stop them ourselves somehow. The sooner the better. Yes, they can't be allowed to continue like this. Sooner or later, newspapers will get wind of it, and if the whole city is suddenly on high alert, you'll be in great danger. How about we burn all those books? Stop them from falling into the wrong hands. Wait a minute, you little arsonist. This is our only way to understand what we're dealing with. You want to drop a bomb into a fire to defuse it? I want to see what Justin comes up with. I feel very sorry for the victims, but this is the first time we've had a chance to get a first-hand account. All the victims suffered unnecessarily cruelty and violent injuries, making me wonder if that is also some kind of requirement. So, the method behind those murders might hold the answer to this mystery. It'd be very helpful if we could gather those signs to further study the origin and purpose of the rituals. I don't think Justin knows a lot about these things. He's a small-time detective, so he can move around without being watched constantly, but I doubt he can do much at the actual scene itself. When he comes back, we'll explain everything to him. He needs to be aware of how urgent this matter is, no matter what it takes. It's time for him to take advantage of his position. One book absolutely isn't enough. We have to dig up more information about it, even if it means sneaking the body over to Hermitage. With that coward, this mess will already be too much for him to handle. I think you'd be expecting too much of him. The dead can't come back. Even if it's a sad affair, we mustn't dwell on it. It'll just add to the pain. Figuring out why they died is the only way to save more lives. That's the truth of it, and one that many people realize too late in their lives. What are you talking about? Neko frowns, never having been a fan of enigmatic speeches. I'm just counting on this. I look at the clutter of files around us, one sickening photo after another, countless notes staring back at me. Those notes all belong to one person. I can't shake this feeling. Could he really be a member? Justin returns to Hermitage with an exhausted look on his face. It's noon already. He looks like he's been up all night, and his hair is beyond messy. His clothes are wet and dirty and in severe need of some dry cleaning. Scarlet left earlier, leaving only Neko and me as witnesses to his sad appearance. Wow, looks like scouring the riverbanks left some marks on you. Neko completely ignores the tenseness of this delicate situation and throws a pack of paper towels in Justin's direction. Justin catches it without responding, as usual. Arranging for the boat to be dredged took some time, but thankfully the water isn't too deep in that area. Someone was fishing there, but when he found the body, he contacted the police immediately. Too bad he didn't give chase himself. That would have only caused you more trouble in the long run, believe me. He's giving a statement, but I'm not really in a position to ask questions. That's why I came back after listening in on his statement a little to brief you guys on the situation. What was the scene like? Did you take a picture? I barely managed to get in and out without attracting too much attention, let alone take pictures. I was lucky enough to have a spare cell phone with me to turn in, otherwise you wouldn't have been able to contact me. They must be scared of the news leaking out. That wouldn't be good for anybody. If I remember correctly, the leaders of several countries will be there for an important meeting pretty soon. A series of murders in such close vicinity would be the last straw for the police. It would crush them. Here's the gist of it. The culprit wrapped the victim in plastic and sank the body into the river via a rope and a rock. Because of the rain that had fallen the night before, the river's current was swift, giving us barely enough time to retrieve the rope. Unlike the victim found sunk in the mud along the riverbank, this time it was farther offshore. The body was being dragged along the riverbed, so we were lucky to have found it early enough. Were you able to confirm any injuries? I know water damage can make forensic identification difficult. The body wasn't in the water that long, but I'm not sure how to describe it. Justin's expression turns into a mixture of doubt and indignation. Immediately after removing the plastic, one of the more experienced detectives made a quick on-site assessment. The body had heavy cut wounds across the arms and lower legs, as well as marks of some kind. Just like the previous ones. It's his conclusion that bothers me. It's strange. He thought that those wounds and injuries weren't fatal. Come again? Are you familiar with ancient torture methods? The person's death is postponed, often until the date of execution, but the pain inflicted is so severe that the person being tortured felt as if they were dying, and oftentimes they did. And those injuries, they seem like they should have been enough to kill a person, trust me. But somehow it wasn't the actual cause of death. That's right, the windpipe and lips show clear signs of drowning. In other words, the body shut down after being sunk, not before. For some reason, the clear facts like this calm me down as soon as they're on the table. I just can't comprehend such a vicious cruelty. How can anybody with even a shred of humanity do something so heinous? I'm with you on that. They must have completely abandoned any form of conscience. Yes, but we still have to try to make sense of it. How could a healthy mind ever make sense of this? We have to ignore aspects like morality and conscience in this case. It's hard, but we won't get anywhere otherwise. If possible, it would be best to re-examine the body that was found in the building. We should be able to determine the time of death from the wound, even if most of the body was removed, or even if the blood was removed. Well, at least I hope that part happened after death, otherwise it's straight up nightmare fuel. Deliberately injuring and mutilating a body to cover up the other traces sounds cruel, but sadly it's nothing new. Hold on a second, what are you trying to say? Why did they go to such lengths to make sure someone died in the river? That's what we should be thinking about. At this point, there's no connection between the victims, and it's unlikely that they were tortured because of some personal vendetta. In other words, there has to be a purpose to this. Even if they did it reluctantly, if the ritual called for it, they would have done it. Who knows what they thought might happen if they didn't follow the instructions. Alright, why don't we stop it there. This is audap. You've been watching Hermitage Strange Case Files on Nintendo Switch. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream.